I would like to thank you everyone for coming to this Amana webinar session, but I would like to open it up with a prayer. Um, so, because in the current time that we're living, things are quite hectic in terms of the coronavirus and everything else that is currently taking place. So, I would like to just basically say, Jesus, thank you for this time that we could come together this afternoon and just to come together and listen to what we have to say about social entrepreneurship in a time that the world is really suffering in turmoil. People are dying almost on a daily basis with coronavirus, and we come here to speak about social entrepreneurship, something that is actually that is actually to do good for society and for societal change. I just pray that you will just have this time together, and it would be great, and that you'll enjoy it as well. Thank you in your name. Amen. So there's a little bit of an agenda that I have today. So basically it was the opening in prayer, a welcome about me, some discussion, and then basically some questions and then the ending. Um, in terms of just a verse that I would like to go with the prayer is Second Chronicles 7 verse 14. If my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sins and heal their land. Now, this verse is perhaps appropriate, perhaps inappropriate, because I mean, hundreds of people has been praying for coronavirus to go away and things to get better. Yet there are still people dying and being infected on a daily basis. But I think more than to look at that perhaps God is not answering our prayers or something like that. Perhaps we should just look at the first part of that verse. We should perhaps just humble ourselves and pray and just seek His face, um, so that He can speak to us in this moments, because maybe He has something to show us or to teach us through this difficult time in the world right now. Um, to introduce myself, I'm basically Cameron Visagie. I'm from Cape Town, South Africa, living on the kind of the west coast, um, and I'm one of the professors in marketplace ministry at the Mana Bible Institute in Tallahassee, Florida, USA. So I grew up in Retreat. So that is the house that I lived in when we lived in Retreat. That is a former colored community, and we lived basically in the main road for pretty much 22 years of my life. That's where we lived. Retreat is a community that has been created, and during the apartheid era, where colored people was basically forced to during that era. This is um, in the color photo is my daughter and my wife. That is when we visited New York a couple of years back. So there's that is kind of my responsibility right now. And there's another addition, which is a Staffordshire Bull Terrier, which I actually forgot to put on this one, but that's another one of my responsibilities that I have. I'm involved with bottom-up social development, who does work in schools, in basically public schools in Cape Town, and they're involved with representative council of learners. So they do training for that, and then they also run a speak out conference, which is a conference for young people. So they assist them to do presentations, and basically it goes a lot around advocating, as well as a few other programs like chess that they do. And I'm also involved with Tribe Social Development, who's a non-profit that really was around to provide meals in an area called Bonteheuwel. And then they did some sports coaching and mentoring as well for one or two um, children just before the lockdown. And then I'm involved with VNL Transport. It's basically a transport organization that is kind of mine. And I will say this is really one of this is my social entrepreneurship component. And I will get into why I say that, although it's supposedly a for-profit business, but I'll elaborate on that a little bit later. So that is a little bit about me coming from Cape Town, South Africa. So who are the famous social entrepreneurs? Before we get into defining social entrepreneurship or or, or anything like that, let's see who are the famous ones. So Bill Drayton, he is the founder of an organization called Ashoka, which is a network of social entrepreneurship, and they basically work to identify and support the world's leading social entrepreneurs. Um, and he's also the guy that coined social entrepreneurship in the early 80s. Then many of you may know Blake. I'm gonna try and pronounce that surname, Mayakovsky. And he's the founder of Tom Shoes. And Tom Shoes basically donates a pair of shoes for every pair of shoes that we buy. I think at one stage, my wife may have purchased some of those Tom shoes a couple of years back. So he's the founder. So those are two famous guys. I'm going to mention another two, which is Muhammad Yunus. He's the founder of Grameen Bank in Bangladesh. They provide microfinance and microcredit to women, or basically the poor, to start their businesses. And he's also a Nobel Prize winner, as well as he's received another award. I forget the name of the award, but another award by in the US. And then Scott Harrison, who's the founder of Charity Water. He is also quite a popular or perhaps famous social entrepreneur. They go about digging wells um, to provide safe drinking water for people in developing countries like Africa or countries on the African continent. And they provided water to quite a number of people as well. So I don't know if you have questions before we go into the definition of social entrepreneurship, or if I can just continue on, perhaps. No questions, then I'm going to continue. So when it comes to defining social entrepreneurship, there's no real definition out there for social entrepreneurship other than a number of scholars coming together and formulating a, some sort of a definition for social entrepreneurship. Um, so with Bill Drayton, he like I said earlier, he's the one that coined the term social entrepreneurship in the 80s. Um, he, he came with the term social entrepreneurship exists to create social value in solving societal problems. So now if we just take a step back perhaps and we take entrepreneurship for what it is, entrepreneurship is there to create value or to create businesses in order to create value, and value in terms of a profit. So similarly, social entrepreneurship is kind of the same thing. The only thing is they're creating businesses, taking risks to start organizations, but to create social good or a social value. And if we look at our societies today, our society is in a bit of a mess, if you want to put it that way, because we've got many organizations that are out there for profit, and people are taking huge amounts of profits or growing their businesses and doing very little for society. And those who are trying to um, do work in society, they may lack the resources to effectively do that work. Yet they're the ones on the ground who knows exactly what their community needs and um, and where the community has to go. So Greg Greg or Gregory Dees, he's also one of the founders of social entrepreneurship, and he basically um, went along by perhaps giving social entrepreneurship a bit of a better definition. Um, so he basically said adopting a mission, what we should do, we should adopt a mission to create and sustain social value. We should recognize and relentlessly pursue new opportunities to serve that mission. So that is basically what I was talking about now, identifying it, who's the best people to identify the problem in society. That is basically the people who's currently living there, other than big name social entrepreneurs. Um, Also then engage in the process of continuous innovation, adaptation, and learning. So as we do something, I mean, those of us who may be involved in some sort of research work or doing research at our respective businesses or places or social or organizations, we know that we need to be in a place of consistent research in order to understand how we're going to get from point A to point B. And the same applies to social entrepreneurs. They need to do exactly the same in that process. And and there's some a bit of a difference is that we're working with people that may have needs or that are in need or battling in some way. So there's a lot of things that we need to consider as we actually engage in that process. So that is some sort of a definition for social entrepreneurship. Do you have any questions related to that so far? No, nothing. Okay, now before I go into the next slide, we've kind of mentioned these big name social entrepreneurs, and for us that may be somewhat unattainable because we are actually perhaps normal human beings um, trying to do our little bit kind of one step at a time or the best that we can do. But now I go back and I look at the background of some of these big name social entrepreneurs. So the mission of Ashoka is basically everyone a change maker or part of the mission, and to develop, to identify and support the world's leading social entrepreneurs. That is a great endeavor, but for me personally, I find that a little bit exclusive. Perhaps they're referring to that I'm also a leading social entrepreneur. Perhaps you a leading social entrepreneur. However, I don't know, I'm not sure that I would include something like that in my mission, the world's leading, because who are the world's leading social entrepreneurs? It is in actual fact you and I. And then I look at Tom Shoes, for example. Tom Shoes is giving one pair of shoes for every pair of shoes bought. But the question goes in, where's the shoes being purchased? What is the cost of the shoes? And who's the real social entrepreneur in that instance? If we're the ones supporting Tom Shoes, um, perhaps we actually the social entrepreneur, um, based on the cost sold and the cost bought and all the other costs associated with that. And then, for example, Scott Harrison um, from Charity Water, he was wealthy beforehand. Grameen Bank is a bank for the poor, um, but interest rates are 20% or the equivalent of 10% on a flat rate. So with some of those things, the question is, before we do anything, before we support a particular organization, before we start an organization, before we support an individual, we need to go into the background and fully understand what is social entrepreneurship and where we're going and where we're coming from. Um, because otherwise it can reflect as any other for-profit organization. And we do know many non-profit entities outside of this framework that operate as for-profit businesses. And that is a good thing because they're still doing a good work, including these organizations. They're all doing good work, but we need to understand the backstory. Perhaps a smaller non-profit organization can actually do more work in the community than a bigger one. So now I look at what does the Bible have to say, looking at the definitions of social entrepreneurship and what we need to do in terms of looking out for problems in society and changing and creating something to change that problems or to bring um, to make it a bit of a better place for people. So I look to Acts 2 verse 45, and perhaps I take the verse for what it is. And they began selling their possessions or their property and possessions and were sharing them with all as anyone might have need. So now we do understand that it was written for the people in Acts, but that is also a model for the church as we have today, and for us as Christians, Christians as well as those who claim to follow Christ. Um, so, if that is the case, and we need to do that, and also we need to understand they did not sell necessarily all their possessions; they still sold out of excess. But um, with this said, there shouldn't necessarily be people that are in need amongst us. Although now some of you might say that, no, but the scripture says the poor will always be amongst you. Yes, we understand that, but there should not be anyone that are in need. And needs can be really anything. Perhaps financial is one aspect of a need, but there are a whole host of other needs. So if I look at the Maslow hierarchy of needs and I kind of work at combining those, if I take X and the Maslow hierarchy of needs, and I say, okay, let's look at what are the needs of people. People need food, they need sleep or rest, and they need water. So yes, financial resources is going to give them that basis to create that need. But but X is saying that that need has to be met for people. Then they need security and safety. So what do they need there? They need a roof over their head. They need a safe place where they can sleep. Because if they don't have a safe place where they can sleep, they cannot rest. Where are they going to eat? Then once those needs are met, then and family and intimacy, that is also a need. But like the Maslow hierarchy of needs demonstrates, those needs are working in an hierarchy that the one is built on top of the other. And then I'm going to stop at the fourth one, and basically which is esteem, and basically a sense of self-worth. So now I go back to that. I go back to Acts 2 verse 45, and I say, if we as Christians are the biggest number or the biggest group of people following a particular religion or belief, which is Christianity, I think we're about 2.5 billion people who claims to follow Christ or to be Christian, in whichever way that may be. Then I have to ask, if we make up almost a third of the world's population, then why is there so many people currently in need? Um, I don't know if some others would like to just comment on why do we think that there are so many currently in need.
I think from my side, hi everybody. When you say the verse that the poor will always be with us, it's a constant reminder that me if I say I'm a follower of Christ, I need to constantly be aware of it and constantly be plowing into that. I don't think it's a cop out for Christians to say that the poor will be with us, so we ignore them and we do nothing. Um, it's also a bit strange for me that these people starting these who are seen as social entrepreneurs are really coming from money. I'm yet to see, or you see in our communities in South Africa, you'll see There are people giving from nothing, and they are not recognized for what they do. And for me, that is the true entrepreneur, or maybe, yeah, the true social entrepreneur, because they rely on fellow neighbors to give them stuff so they can give people stuff, or they just actually just share from the little that they have. So I don't know. For me, there's always a conflict of we celebrate these multimillionaires who have money already, and so what risk are they actually putting out there? And like you say, if we dig down to really see what they're doing, and I buy one pair of shoes, and like you explained to me earlier in the week, I buy one pair of shoes, and then someone else get a free pair of shoes. If it's made in India or China, what is the true cost of that shoes? Are we actually following the trail of is those things ethically made? So yeah, that I found very interesting. But for me, it actually dawned on me now when you said the poor will always be with us. It means that I'm constantly to be aware of that, and so my duty as a Christian should be to always be aware and to always reach out. Shouldn't be a cop out to say it doesn't matter if I don't give them because they're going to be here anyway. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you for that. Is there anybody else who maybe want to comment?
Yeah, I have a few thoughts. So I totally agree with what was previously said. I think a lot of this is also really truly bent on the idea that this society is capitalistic and that the way that society should run should be based upon money. So
Yeah.
when first learning Greek and translating Greek, a lot of people want to see the term that's translated as property, kremata, as meaning like money. That's not what it means. But I can see how people would make that connection because possessions at some point they were the money of the society, right? You were rated or compared, and stratification was brought into communication or into communities by how many possessions you had, right? And we're still very much living in that very archaic system while still under the impression that we're not, because we're capitalistic and consumeristic. So one of the things that's happening in America, for example, due to COVID is, oh, the economy is at risk. Why? Because people don't have money. And why is that a problem? Because people can't buy things, right? Like you can't consume if you don't have money. And our society, capitalism, it teaches us that we must buy to give or to profit, to increase and cause society to evolve. So I think that's part of the issue, that money and the need for capital, the need to increase your possessions as a sign of one's financial health and security, is that's more so seen as the need instead of getting people healthy, getting the homeless off the streets, making sure that people have food in their bellies. It's all about money. I think that also kind of fuels these really I'll just say poor examples of social entrepreneurship. Like I really find it hard to see the founder of Tom's as a social entrepreneur, and you kind of hinted at this, Professor Cam, because um he just seems to kind of be like a person who's kind of giving a donation, if that makes any sense. That's all he's doing. Like, buy my shoes, I'm gonna give a donation to some poor group out there. And that doesn't mean that you're out in the trenches and that your work central purpose is the upkeep of the society. So I really love that you've taken this to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because it really does kind of flesh out the fact that people have multiple needs. And it reminds me of that story in Acts with the beggar at the gate called Beautiful, right? Like, I don't have silver and
Yeah.
gold, but here's some healing, kind of causes this very different this it shows this need for a very different mentality of what it means to be a social entrepreneur.
Thank you. Thank you for your input. Even even I think of some things that we need to we need to be so aware of of those around us and what is happening. But too often we're too accepting. I was actually making a comment the other day that specifically around people that has been oppressed, that we are very and perhaps I'm speaking in a South African context, or yeah, and we're very compliant to some extent, to some extent, in the sense that if I take apartheid and what it did to certain communities in South Africa, we've basically our history has kind of been wiped out. We and maybe yeah, our history has been wiped out. In some instances, um, we may be black, we may be colored, we may be white, but we look at the oppressed, and some may have had a black father and a white mother, and they've got no place. And during apartheid, they were separated from each other. So the history was cut off right there. So they've been broken down to such a point where they basically are empty. And what they easy to accept, or we are easy to accept anything that comes our way, instead of going a little bit further, despite our circumstance, to actually dig deep and understand what is happening, what is the organization for, is it worthwhile investing or doing something, getting involved. And I think that is an important thing, especially for oppressed groups, that we need to stand up and say we're not just going to accept anything that comes along our path, because I think that becomes a little bit um, dangerous for us as an oppressed people. And then in terms of Christians, like I mentioned earlier, so many are in need. There's poverty all around us. Things like apartheid or the Jim Crow or the informal settlements still haunt us today. I mean, it is completely insane. At the same time, like I mentioned earlier, there are 2.5 billion Christians, but we're still struggling with these issues years after some of these laws and policies has been, in some sense, changed. In in the US, we're currently having protest action, people storming the Capitol. Um, in South Africa, we've also have things going on, protests because of inequality, um, separate functions for people of color versus um, the Caucasian group. I mean, where are we going at this point in time, and especially now when the world is in such a crisis? We need to actually start banding together and working together for a common cause. And in some sense, that is where social entrepreneurship is coming in. That we are all responsible in one way or the other for the betterment of our society. Then I'm gonna now you may say that, Cameron, but now you're talking about um, you're talking about social entrepreneurship and what it kind of it's it's for all of us to do. We all need to get involved with social entrepreneurship. Perhaps alluding to that we are all social entrepreneurs in our own right. But now, in what are you doing? So some may ask me now, what are you doing and to be talking on this topic of social entrepreneurship? One, yes, we can say that we have an academic background, but I'm not too sure if that is good enough to actually say that I've got an academic background, um, and I'm and by right I can talk on the topic. So for me, the way I look at it, and kind of part of my story is I take my for one, I started my transport organization before I even go into my family and things. The transport organization that I operate at the moment, and like I alluded to, I said that is my social entrepreneurship component. When it comes to the team that works with us, first of all, I don't refer to them as an employee or the driver. I refer to them as part of my team. So my team does things together. We are a team together. We do things together. When we struggle, we go through the struggle together. When there's good times, we go through the good times. And to come down to a more practical example is what how do I remunerate the team? Do I walk away with the fat salary at the end of the month while the team is earning um, way less than what I do? No, that's not the case. In this case, it's the complete opposite. At the moment, that I ensure that the team is paid before I get paid, um, or, or or I make sure that by somehow that we, even at times when things are tight, that we're still able to ensure that they are remunerated. Because in turn, the 80 members that I have are responsible for 30 other people cumulatively. So I'm not only responsible for myself, I have to ensure that those other 30 and 38 people, that their needs are met. And that comes at a cost in a society right now, especially and in an economy that is struggling. Um, in some sense, one would say that you're making a sacrifice, um, and the cost involved may be high for others that are around me as well. So that is one example. And then I look at another example. For in bottom up and thrive, where I'm able to support, or where the transport organization is able to support those organizations. We try and support where we're able to support. If we have additional resources, we try and support those organizations because we cannot be everywhere at the same time. So those are perhaps not the biggest non-profit organizations even in South Africa, let alone the world, but they're doing their own good in their own spaces that they're operating in. And then I look at something else, and perhaps this is not necessarily a thing that I'm doing, but it's more that I've unwillingly done. And maybe this is some sort of a confession, but it's more of how I've been treated during this time. So I come and I would say something like, I've donated to government organizations or indirectly to government organizations, to some big retailers in South Africa and some smaller local businesses in South Africa. So we ask, but Cameron, how did you do this? And why did you do something like that? The question is, it wasn't me doing it. That was fraudulent. So people has actually fraudulently defrauded the people that I'm trying to serve out of resources by not paying when services being rendered, by underpaying for services rendered, and indirectly I look at to give me some sort of comfort. I say no, I've donated to those organizations, but the proper place for that actually to have gone is actually to the people that I'm serving directly or indirectly, the ones that need it the most. Because the government doesn't need it. The big South African retailers don't need it, nor does other local business don't need it. But people get away because us as a small business community, as social entrepreneurs, are not standing up together to fight these guys. And I'm one example where that has occurred. How many other small business who's feeding so many people, who's trying to keep people in jobs or being defrauded out of resources um, to keep their staff employed, um, and the connected families employed. perhaps that part is maybe more of a testimony than anything else. But through God's grace, He's still able to help us somehow meet the needs of those who we serve.
So, Professor Cam, I think you're making some really great points here, and really emphasizing not only the need for people to consider who they are serving and who they're giving their monies to, and emphasizing the need to, you know, help and assist nonprofits and smaller organizations who are doing the work of social entrepreneurship to better the community. But I think your other point concerning the need for people to rethink how they see their own, co-workers or employees is also equally different. You see your employees as a team, not necessarily, oh, that's my driver, or that's my maid, or whatnot. You're a team. And I think that that's really, really central here. But there's also some comments that you have here. I believe Helen or Ashley has a comment for you.
Hi there, it's Ashley here.
Hi there.
I just want to pick up on a comment that was made a while ago around the capitalist system. Of course, for me, that was such an important point to make. Is like for myself, I struggle with the concept of entrepreneurship or social entrepreneurship, because a lot of people who claim to be entrepreneurs or social entrepreneurs are essentially kind of just trying to get by themselves, and they are caught in a system whereby they are forced to act in certain ways, or they have little controls, for example, over how they source products, for example. So I think that was one of the things that were mentioned already. Is like, for example, if we're doing something, where's the products being sourced? Like everything's being made in China with like really poorly paid labor, and your business is premised on this. There's one issue, but for me, a bigger even issue, kind of with operating in the capitalist system, is the issue of labor. So when people are employing people within a business, and so obviously this would mean someone that's more than just one person operating a business, right? But when you're employing people, who actually benefits from the business? Is it just the owner, or is it those employees that operate there as well? And that I mean in the sense of when we start challenging capitalism as a system, then the whole idea of profit also needs to be troubled. And
Correct.
for me, that comes down to, for example, it's not just an issue with exchange, but an issue with, for example, when a business does succeed, like how is that redistributed to the people who actually labor within that organization? And I think that for me is probably one of the crux issues, and maybe one of the difficult ones to deal with, like within the concept of social entrepreneurship. So I'd be interested to know, for example, how Cameron, even Latoya as well, how you think about that issue of labor.
I think for me, definitely, like I mean, in terms of South Africa, we know, or maybe the world, we know that the current system is not working well. We've got people claiming to having what they call maybe let's call it a CSI component in the organizations, but then they're walking away with 500 million at the end of the year, while the lowest paid worker is getting 1,500 rand for the month, or maybe 4,000 rand for the month, or in maybe let's make it in dollar terms. Let's go to say $300, and the highest paid guys maybe walking away with um, say 500,000 or something. Um, so there's a vast difference. So in those organizations, they would still claim. I'm going to get to your point now. They would still claim that people they're doing great for the community. They're donating food. They're giving this. They're doing that. But in actual fact, there's no charity at all because their own employees are suffering. Their own employees can't purchase homes. They can't purchase a vehicle to get to work. They've got to walk to work in rain. Currently, we're facing with a situation in South Africa where we've got taxis. So in COVID, we've got 20 people in a taxi, but that is the only method of transportation that the people can take. People don't have a other choice. other than walking maybe for 27 kilometers from one point to Cape Town to go and work. So for me, the way I see it and the way that I would want to to make change is that as our organization grows, and I'm specifically maybe relating it to the transport one, as that grows and as we get support, that together we all grow. And kind of we've already set that model in place whereby we know salaries is everybody's salary is comparable to one another. From from our salaries to the team salaries, everything is directly comparable. At times you can almost say there is no salary that we're taking as current owners of the organization. But it doesn't help me at this point in time adding my team members as part of the shareholding of the organization and implicating them in a current situation whereby perhaps say the economy is under pressure. So perhaps when the economy picks up, that is something that I've already spoken about in meetings, that when the business picks up, you want to include the team members as part owners in the organization so that they grow together um, with the organization. But more organizations has to do that, especially I'm saying now especially, but it applies to everyone. But the bigger organization, the corporations where people are literally um, being oppressed still today, um, legally oppressed. That's the I use the term legally oppressed. That is where things need to be reshaped or rethought through. And perhaps it's a protest that needs to take place, because by us talking, that may not never happen. But if we were to stand together as a society and say, but look here, for this month, we understand that this organization is employing 1,000 people, but there's 100,000 people in the community who's struggling. Let us all start supporting our local enterprise. That is kind of actually more towards the end of my slide. But to look at something like that so that we can move forward together in some sense. And I do agree with you. The capitalist system is, I don't think it's the ideal, nor do I think socialism is the ideal, and nor communism is the ideal situation. I think, like my Gabe Vies, or Dr. Gabe Vies, my mentor, he kind of alluded to, we need to perhaps look at a system where where the system and the people are working together for the greater good of all. And I think that is something that we need to try and consider. How that is going to take place, I don't know, but I think it is possible, because if we all start something or start doing that in our community, we can get to that point. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, I think it does. I think there's some comments actually in the Zoom comment box that might that definitely agrees with what you're saying, Professor Cam. And maybe we should just read off a few of them
I'm
for the
trying to see
Facebook.
where this comes. Okay, I'm going to listen to you.
um, okay, so Helen and Ashley said they gave an example of Jeff Bezos, who donates to shelters while his own staff are wearing diapers at work and they have to use those very same shelters. Um, uh, I mentioned a comment about first world countries. This is especially the case with the United States, where, you know, we kind of go and be superhero out in the world. You know, we want to go and solve the world's issues and resolve the homelessness and the, you know, war polemics of other countries. But people in our country are actually really poor. There are people in our country not living a living wage. They don't work for a living wage. And minimum wage is really low in this country. It is not enough to actually really survive in our very capitalistic society. Um, um, uh, I think this is your wife. They both say Cameron.
Yeah,
You're
no.
right. I want to make sure I
Yes,
give credit to where it should go.
that's correct.
I have she mentioned that she assists with NPO accounting, and there are some directors in management um, who earn 4 times more than the people actually doing the work, and that should be addressed. And yeah, I totally agree with all of that. It's always the worker bees who kind of get the pennies, and the people who are managing them, they get all the credit for the
Absolutely.
work that they're not doing. So I think these comments are really bringing across some really important things that we should definitely talk about and think about how to resolve, right? Because we
Correct.
all complain and talk about them. We've been doing it for centuries, really. But how do we actually create a difference in, or make a difference, and how do we actually create social, like, organizations that are actually really truly socially conscious and starting in their own backyard? Because I think that's the issue here in the comments. It's that we go out and we want to be socially conscious and go out into somebody else's property and territory and backyards, but we don't handle you know the stuff that's a lot closer to home.
Absolutely. I think that what you're mentioning is so true. Even some of the comments, it's the comments about Jeff Bezos and that is very similar to us in South Africa and perhaps other places in the world as well. And we need to be moving towards a better place, because the world is coming to in some sense, for me, this is what I feel. This is just a feeling, but I feel the world is coming to a point where it may implode on itself because um, of the amount of poverty that is in existence out there, or the amount of people that are struggling and that are in need, and nothing's really being done about it, um, because the systems that are in place are still supporting those those with piles and piles of money, and who's actually able to do a lot but is actually not doing a lot, or they're picking what they want to do that may not affect any change at all. So I agree that we need to look at how we're going to do things differently, as well as start beginning to realize that we play a pivotal role in society moving forward, regardless of whether we even employed or not, whether we're earning an income or not. I think us as citizens of the world, um, we have a role to play, a significant role to play, because wealth cannot be created without slaves. It's virtually impossible. And it is for us, sorry that I use the term slaves, but it is almost for us that as slaves, to take a stand um, worldwide and start doing things. Um, I'm thinking, which way do I go? Okay, I don't know if there's any other comments related to this, then I'll just continue. And I'm gonna skip a slide. I'm gonna go to the slide of Wonder Woman, and particularly the quote. Sometimes you can't see what you're learning until you come out on the other side. That is one of the quotes that struck me in this movie. And the reason why it struck me is because perhaps that would need to happen. Because if we take, for example, Bill Gates or some wealthy guy, Jeff Bezos or something, and we actually put him in a township in South Africa without any resources, access to security, access to anything, he turns into a normal human being. or whoever that person may be, they turn into a normal human being without the wealth, without the resources, without security, without everything, and even without a job, and fend for themselves. Perhaps only then, perhaps only then will they learn what the other individuals are going through. And maybe then they will look at the world differently. Um, but that quote really stood out for me, in terms of we're only going to learn once we come out on the other side, or once we see what's happening on the other side. And then in terms of some practical ways that I feel that we can look at doing things, other than, like I've mentioned already, to view ourselves as social entrepreneurs, each and every one of us that are on this call and people that will listen to it in the future. We are all social entrepreneurs. We're all feeding our family if we're able to, whether we're working or not, and we've got a family. Somehow we're creating a meal for the family at the end of the day, um, whether it be by hook or by crook. We're trying to do that. We're trying to feed our families. So that's still we being social. It's the system that is in place that is causing people to create, to do things that they don't necessarily want to do. Support our local art, our local talent, and our local businesses. Start supporting our public school system with our knowledge and influence and resources. I take again here with this one, I take myself as an example. Um, I, I I took my daughter out of private education, and for many reasons, but the primary reason that that was placed on my heart was I'm supporting a system that is not for my people, or or for the people that I love. It's just it's just another organization or another businesses that is making a profit. And I cannot support an organization whereby um, my daughter, the only people that my daughter identifies with are the cleaners, the security guards, or the people cooking food, um, as her demographic. And that doesn't really work, because we need to realize that our people and our demographic can also amount to people with education, people with qualifications, people that are running business and doing things in society. So as a community, we need to look at what can we do in our public school system, because our public schools are suffering because we're taking our children out of those schools. I mean, Ashley and Elian um, may talk about this often, that we're breaking the system further by by placing our children into private schools or private universities, etc., and causing further strain on the already strained schooling system. And then we also ensure that marginalized individuals are being employed, and that they're being mentored accordingly and also paid according to the role that they fulfill. During a time when I was working and as an employee, that was the case. You don't get remunerated the same as your colleague. Um, Things like that should be addressed. We need to be remunerated for the role that we fulfill. Um, and then perhaps we should, oh no, maybe this is a more complicated exercise, but develop economic systems um, that are actually truly focused on others, and that works together with the people in order to create a better society. And that is pretty much my version of, or my introduction to social entrepreneurship. Thank you very much. Any questions? If there's no questions, then it's the end.
Thank you, Professor Cam. This was great, and I think it gave us a ton to think about. As just people, I really love that your presentation didn't just simply focus on, what we would do as business owners, but just as people, even giving your example of where you send your child to schooling, right? And where you give your money. So thank you for that. Before we conclude, I do want to let you guys know um, about some of the things that we're doing with ABI. So let me just pull that up. Okay. So we have quite a bit that's going on this month, actually. Next week, we are starting our spring schedule, and I'm really excited about it. Professor Cam, as you see, is really passionate about social entrepreneurship, and he will be teaching a class on social entrepreneurship. It's a 4-week class, and it's term 2, so it will start in February. But just this January, starting this week, we are going to be offering a slew of classes for you. And this is starting our process of offering classes every single month, which will allow you to be a lifelong learner with us. You can register for classes through our monthly subscription plan, which is now discounted, and it will give you the chance to learn with us every single month, and you won't be missing a beat. So for the spring, we have Introduction to Old Testament Torah. I'm teaching that course. It is an 8-week course. And we also have another 8-week course on Bible. This is Introduction to the New Testament, where you focus on the Pauline literature. So you focus on the letters in the New Testament. And if you take the Old Testament course, we're focusing on the first 5 books of the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible, called the Torah. So Genesis to Deuteronomy. And those books are wild. You start off with the whole Jerry Springer meets Game of Thrones, and then you end with, Moses is dead. What do we do? So it's pretty it's a really great book, and it really prepares you for things like what Professor Cam was discussing today, because the people of the ancient world are thinking about these things as well. And the Torah is full of just laws and legislation that really helps people to become more socially conscious. And that's how I teach my Old Testament class. So you're going to actually be learning about how to actually apply biblical teachings to your everyday life. The same with Professor Onika in the New Testament course. We're also offering 3 4-week courses, Prophetic Artistry 101, which I will be teaching. It's all about using your art form to heal you. And then 102 will be about using your art form for your targeted audience. It's going to be a fun class, very, very just really discussion based, and the focus is on you. So we're going to talk about the prophetic and you. In your art form, of course. Gospel parables, which is taught by Professor Onika, focusing on Jesus and the parables, and then marketplace ministry. We do have other courses. You can go to our website or our newsletter and learn about those courses, like social entrepreneurship, which you heard a bit of today, or about today, which Professor Cameron will be teaching. We also have biblical languages primer, which Professor Onika and I will be teaching. It's to prepare you for the work of being a translator of the Bible for yourself. We're actually going to be doing a webinar, an Interpretation Matters webinar on the importance of translation, this coming Tuesday at 6 p.m. So register and be there. It's going to be fun. We're going to have fun with language, and we're going to talk about language as a cultural practice, and why we need to understand the Bible as a cultural book, that requires translators. It requires people who are able to actually have fun and challenge themselves to be an interpreter and a translator of the text for themselves. And last but not least, in February, term 2, we're also offering Bible, Sex, and Other Texts, part 1, which I am teaching, and it's fun, slightly scandalous, which makes it more fun. So definitely register for these classes. We have promotions to help you out here. We are offering enough courses this spring to allow you to start in January and end in May with a whole ministry certificate. And the certificate programs are also 20% off. So go ahead and register for a certificate program. You can be done in 5 months and it will be fun. No worries. We also have 10% off monthly subscriptions. And if you enroll in that Biblical Languages Primer course for $60, what will happen is when you go into your language course in March, that course will be split in half. So technically the Biblical Languages Primer is free. So we do have that promotion going on for you. Last but not least, we want you to come back and come to our free webinars. We do have some Personal Growth Matters webinars that are coming up, which I'm actually really in love with. They're the most effective webinars, in my opinion, that we've had so far as turnout. We do have some media webinars coming up in February on your digital self. We have something on prayer later February, and then some in March, which are all about emotional intelligence, and some on your digital self. And don't forget the Intro to Spiritual Formation. We're going to be talking about some really important but fairly deep things there. We have Ethics, the Church and the Community webinar coming up in February. And we have one on leadership, on effective networking coming up in March, which will be great. Also taught by Professor Cam and co-taught by Professor Cord. And then we have some Real Talks webinars where we're not bringing to you any PowerPoint. We're just going to brain dump. So we're going to come to Zoom and Facebook, and we're just going to talk about specific topics, and you're going to be able to see how all of our crazy minds work. So register for those webinars. We're going to be dishing it out and really talking about things starting with the anointing and ending with the plurality of God. So that's going to be really, really fun, really, really controversial in the church, and it's going to be wild. Last but not least, as I've already mentioned, we do have a webinar coming up. It's on translation. It's called Translation Matters. We're going to be right back here on Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And it's going to be a fun webinar, but extremely informative. And those who come will get a free copy of my chapter on translation, since I'm building out a manual on how to better study the Bible. And I do have a chapter on translation that's ready for you to read and glean from. So register for these free webinars and come back.